This video is brought to you by Incogni.
5 reasons why I left the UK and moved to Dubai.
Dubai.
Is the UK now suffering a brain drain of some of its most important workers?
If you've been on the internet, you may have heard something about an exodus of wealthy, smart people leaving Britain and heading far, far away to places like Dubai, Bali, Thailand to chill in the sun, work on a MacBook, and most importantly, pay 0% in tax.
Why are Brits leaving the UK? Tax is incredibly high.
The UK is second in the world for millionaire exits in 2024.
So in today's video, we're going to really explore two main things. The dark reality of these countries and what keeps them afloat, and what this could mean for the future of Britain and much of the West.
Today, I'm going to go through some reasons as to why I'm thinking of leaving broken Britain.
You don't like this. You don't like this stuff.
I'm in love.
So I'm in Bali, right? And one of the things you'll notice is everyone behind me is a Westerner with a laptop. These are called digital nomads.
Digital nomads.
Digital nomads have become a bit of a phenomena lately of remote workers from the developed world taking their work and living abroad, often in poorer nations.
Do you want to become a digital nomad this year? Let me explain to you how you can make that happen even in just 3 months.
Now, I know on the surface this just looks like people having fun in the sun, but you have to bear in mind what's really going on here. These are talented entrepreneurial individuals who our country has spent 20 odd years investing in. From their health to their education, we've pumped a lot of money into them, and now they're taking those skills and setting up businesses in countries that aren't Britain. Whole lot of foreigners. This is a bit of a pickle. But before we can think about the solution, it's very important that we dig deeper into this topic of brain drain. And to do so, we need to go back to Britain in the 60s.
This is Roy Gordon, a British scientist working in America's aerospace industry in California. He emigrated from Britain in 1967, just one of thousands of young scientists looking for wider opportunities and higher salaries, who joined the so-called brain drain from Europe to the United States.
So brain drain, as a term, came around in the 1960s in Britain, where basically all of the fucking smart boys, the scientists, the doctors, and the academics, they packed their bags, headed to Luton Airport, and fucked off to America and Canada. I know. Back then was very different, right? This brain drain had nothing to do with taxes. You see, back in the 1950s and 60s, in America, the top rate of marginal tax was 91%. This tax rate was equal to, or if anything, maybe slightly higher than what was in the UK. To understand it, you really kind of have to know where America was at after the war. So post-war, they started to spend tons of money into public investments. They poured billions into like state-of-the-art roads. They gave out free university to veterans. And also, they went all in on scientific research. NASA's budget in 1965 hit 4.4% of the American GDP. And, if you believe what they tell you, they got a man on the moon.
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
And as well, because the government backed mortgages, they built out the suburbs, they had created a stable, property-owning middle class, who, instead of how they were living in the past, just having enough money to survive, now had money to spend. And my God, did they spend.
Cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed. Bam!
McDonald's Big Mac.
Now, the reason I explain all this is because it matters to the topic of brain drain, right? Because over in Britain, where all the smart bros were leaving, we too were investing into our people. We made social housing, we made the NHS, etc. But because obviously our economy was just bouncing back from a fucking war that nearly destroyed Earth, America weren't really dealing with that. We literally had to physically rebuild everything. And so America were just in prosperity. They had the capital, they had the scale. America had something much more important than low tax rates, and that was opportunity.
Is there one single dominating reason why British scientists are leaving the country?
Because there is a climate of opinion in the United States which is very much more interested in science. A scientist, and more particularly an engineer or technologist, is a person who is a valuable and respected member of the community. In this country, which is class-ridden and class-conscious, a scientist is still considered as a rather uneducated kind of man from the lower ranks.
So before we continue, I the other day, I found out that there is an entire black market for people who buy and sell your personal data. I'm talking your name, your address, social media profiles, even court records and social security numbers. They take all this data and then they sell it to advertisers, but it can often land in the hand of scammers and fraudsters and spammers. Today's sponsor, Incogni, their sole job is to get that data taken down on your behalf. The way that these data brokers get away with it from like, you know, a legal perspective is because you do have a legal right to demand that they remove your data. However, because your data is on hundreds of different lists, you would not only have to try and find those lists, but also the free time to message each and every one of these companies and get them to take it down. So it is Incogni's job to do that for you. They go after them like rabid dogs to make sure that your data is taken down. And you can track and monitor their progress on their website. These scammers are getting so smart lately that if they can find your voice, they can remake it with AI, and then they use that AI voice to convince your friends and family to give them money. And these scammers can get your voice from these data leaks that are found online. So signing up to Incogni will result in you getting less spam messages, as well as keeping you safe from identity theft, and give you control of your personal data. But you can take your personal data back with Incogni. Use the code Jimmy the Giant in the link below to get 60% off your annual plan at incogni.com/Jimmy the Giant. Anyway, back to the video. I'll be honest, I did a whole section about the second wave of brain drain, but it ran on too long. I'll post that on my Patreon. You can click that in the link below. But let's just jump forward to now. You see, by the 2010s, as everyone's YouTubing and tweeting, where laptops no longer weighed as much as your nan, and video calls had moved beyond dodging penises on Omegle to legit businesses using Zoom. The digitization of the world had fundamentally changed everything. Suddenly, in order to get a visa, you no longer needed to know a guy. You didn't need to have a mountain of paperwork. You didn't even need to have a job offer. All you needed was a MacBook, some decent Wi-Fi, an iced latte, and a picture of you captioned, "Today's office." The internet and social media had completely changed the world. With the introduction of things like the digital nomad visa, countries that maybe were generally a bit poorer have been able to attract the skilled, mobile middle classes to leaving broken Western systems in favor of countries that promise sunshine, low prices, and just a better standard of living. So let's talk about some of these nations that people are going to. So let's start with Dubai.
It's been 6 months since we relocated from the UK to Dubai.
Seeing sunshine, having just a bright environment to look into. In the UK, apart from like a couple of months of the year, it's gloomy, it's rainy, everything is grey.
On the surface, Dubai is like the zero tax dream. Fast track visas that don't ask many questions, you can get them very quick. It's like you're living in Sim City. There's hardly any crime, the police are driving supercars. It's like this weird millionaire's playground, and it has been literally designed to hoover up talent from the Western world. But you might be wondering, how does it do it? You know, how to get no taxes? How can I afford to build all this stuff? Slaves. It's slaves. I'm probably now banned from getting my digital nomad visa, so I'll tell you about it. So 60 to 70% of the UAE's workforce is very low-wage migrant workers, mainly from Southeast Asia. The workers that build the skyscrapers, that clean the 17-star hotels, and that serve you your matcha smatcha lupa latte. These lot are not really living the Dubai dream. They arrive under what's called the kafala system, where their legal status is tied to their employer, which means that they're not allowed to switch jobs. And when they enter the country, pretty much their passports get confiscated and they can't leave. They do earn some money, but the money is terrible. Often their payments get delayed or just not paid at all. And they have no other option but to live in these crammed labor camps that look like prisons, that sleep 6 to a room after they've just worked a 10-15 hour shift in 45-degree heat. And the thing is, right, even Dubai themselves know that this model can't last. In 2023, for the first time ever, they introduced a corporate tax. And it's pretty fucking modest, it's 9%. But they have also announced recently that they're going to move it up to 15%, which is to be in line with OECD standards. In a zero tax economy like Dubai, where 90% of the population are foreigners, and a majority of them are basically human trafficked slaves, that economy it can't last. When only rich people are able to spend and everyone else is just servicing them, basically the economy is unsustainable. We'll get more into that in a little bit. But next we want to jump on the plane and fly over to Singapore. Singapore is like the poster child for like the high-tech, clean, efficient country. They have very low taxes, but they are kind of interesting in that the state owns all the land and they provide lots of social housing. But they too have a pretty dirty little secret, which happens to be also an incredibly poorly paid labor force of migrant workers. They bring them in from the Philippines, Myanmar, and Malaysia, and a good amount of them live in cupboards or laundry closets. It's literally Harry Potter, as they're like maids in their employees' houses. It's very weird.
Amid calls to improve living conditions for foreign workers here in Singapore, experts say many issues must first be solved, such as changing mindsets and other practical issues.
These lot can work up to 6 days a week. They get paid less than minimum wage. And while Singaporeans themselves may have good labor protections, the migrant workers are excluded from those protections. And when you look at Singapore on paper, it looks very good, like the living standards are great, etc. It's because the workers that prop up that living standard don't get counted in the data. And then there is Bali.
Breakfast time, bitch.
Whilst the Instagram influencers of the world are busy getting their chakras aligned, for the locals, life has been getting tougher and tougher every single year. As foreign money has come into the country, the cost of living has spiked so high that the Balinese people are priced out of the communities that they grew up in. The demand that tourism has put on food and agriculture has meant that the traditional organic way of farming has basically had to give way to pesticide-heavy monocrops to basically keep up with the demands of these luxury restaurants. And like, whilst a digital nomad may be paying, I don't know, $500 a month for some beautiful seafront location, earning at least 60 grand a year from their laptop and often paying 0% income tax, the cleaner of the flat is probably getting something like $150 a month. And that's kind of the thing, right? In order to prop up these low tax havens, you have to have exploitation. Behind them, there is always an invisible labor force who are stripped of any protections or dignity, and all the while an unsustainable growing inequality that is pricing locals out of their own towns. But for the wealthy foreigner, it presents a very good standard of living compared to where they came from.
What is it like living in Bali?
It's a good quality of life, yeah. You look around, it's blue skies, it's cheap living. Yeah, it's great.
$400. Let's take a look at the view. How's the view? Oh, just some kind of view of the greyness of the UK. Some dilapidated housing there. Lincoln, what do you think?
In the UK, where once upon a time we were the ones pulling in talent, is now watching its own people quietly leaving. There's been a lot of talk about immigration into the UK, and especially in 2023. But one of the things people don't really talk about is how many people left the UK. In 2023, over 500,000 people left. One of the highest figures in over a decade. And to be completely fair, if you look closer into this data, British nationals who are leaving the UK, as a share of that 500,000, is admittedly smaller than it was back in the 2000s. Is less about how many people and more about who is leaving. That who is often educated professionals who work remotely on their laptops. And over the last 20 or so years, it has become substantial. Dubai is now home to approximately 180,000 British expats. And when surveyed, 23% of British people say that they want to leave Britain. And you gotta think about it like this, right? These are people that we have spent our money, our personal money, and also taxpayer money into training, housing, NHSing for over 2 decades. With the idea being that as they grow into being adults, they will earn and make money in the UK. But now they're in Bali selling a fitness course. And also, as the same time this is happening, right, brain drain, we've also decided to block people coming here.
Well, the policy on immigration that we're announcing today delivers on the vote of the referendum and takes back control of our borders. It ensures that we bring an end to free movement once and for all.
Since Brexit happened, right, international student numbers have plummeted into the UK. And this really matters, right? Because in the past, if people left the UK, it was kind of okay because they would be replaced by people who wanted to be here. It was like an exchange of talent. And often the people that would come here would stay here and set up their lives here, especially students. In 2018 to 2019, 35% of non-EU students whose student visas were expiring would apply for extended visas to remain in the UK. Also, when we had free movement with the EU, we would have had loads that would have remained in the UK. And it's especially important when you think about students because they're the sort of young, ambitious people with drive, the new skills that are most in tune with the world as it evolves, who would very often go on to creating businesses, to becoming entrepreneurs. They would become taxpayers and long long-term contributors to our society. But now we're just like trying to make it as hard as possible to stop these people coming. We've jacked up tuition costs. The rules of getting a visa into the UK has got tighter and tighter. The message we've been portraying to the world has changed from welcome in friends, come and build a life, pay some tax, into basically, yeah, come pay your fees and then fuck off. It's just not a good offer. We're not offering them a good deal there. And so the number of international students are dropping. And so we are currently exporting our talent that we have paid for to the rest of the world whilst blocking the talent that they have paid for. You see what I'm saying? This is dumb. It's stupid.
University bosses in the UK are warning that 10,000 jobs could be lost in higher education.
Many are struggling with rising costs amid a dramatic fall in the number of high fee-paying international students.
And so when you hear all that and you understand these low-tax countries and how they operate, it starts begging a question, like, what is the right economy? What economy do we want to have here? A good economy, and it's a big discussion, a lot of people have different theories, but a good economy isn't just about having a high GDP. America and China both have high GDPs, and both of them have areas in which there's lots of poverty and lots of problems. A good economy also isn't about how many luxury skyscrapers are built or how many Teslas are parked in their driveways. Having just rich people come to an economy doesn't make it a good economy. A healthy economy is an economy where money circulates around all levels of wealth. When Bob the Brickie earns enough money to get new windows on his house and can hire a local white van man to come around and do it, that is value which has been created within the economy. This is why people bang on so much about the middle class and why it's important. It's called a demand-driven economy, where basically a lot of people have enough purchasing power, enough money to spend to create the economic conditions for growth. That's how you build a middle class. But in places like Bali and Dubai, we see the opposite of that. You have two tiers of society. You have the rich and the poor. There's not a lot in the middle. And this creates what is called a supply side economy. These are economies that focus on keeping taxes very low and also keeping the wages that they have to pay out very low as well. And this is very good for investors. This makes them very happy. You can have your slaves build a luxury apartment complex and sell them for a load of money.
I've got two friends who are personal trainers, fitness trainers. One fitness trainer has decided to stop working more hours because he's hit 50 grand a year and he now gets taxed at 40%. And then the other fitness trainer went to Dubai, launched an online fitness community, and has just bought a $350,000 Ferrari. When entrepreneurs start companies, we can either start them in high tax economies or with a stroke of a pen, start them in low tax economies.
And when we get sold this idea that we need to adopt this low tax model, they offer that idea from the assumption that if you make conditions that are very good for capital, for money, people that own wealth, the benefits of that will trickle down to your average plebeian. But you see, despite this idea being the dominant idea of our time since the 80s, the trickle down never happens. It just doesn't happen. Because think about it, in that deeply unequal society where you have very poor people and very rich people, the white van man that I mentioned earlier that would go and fix his neighbor's windows, if his neighbor doesn't have money or windows to fix, why would he use his skills to earn money from them when instead he could just go and work for a large firm at the 27-star beach resort that has lots of windows to fix and lots of money to spend? But because that labor supply is in such high demand, and if they tried to unionize to get better wages, etc., they're just going to be fired, they kind of just have to accept the scraps that are given to them.
I mean, I look at what you do. You walk in and you just say, you want to quit? They go on strike. I won't mention the name of the company, but they go on strike and you say, that's okay, you're all gone. You're all gone. So every one of you is gone and you are the greatest. You would be very good. Oh, you would love it.
This is what we see in economies that have deep, deep, deep wealth inequality. You get cleaners living in fucking cupboards while digital nomads are live streaming from hot tubs on a rooftop. These kind of economies don't build long-term sustainability. They're built on a dependence on external capital, on tourism and remote workers, many of whom have zero loyalty to that nation and will very happily leave when the next tax haven pops up with even lower taxes. This right here is the dark side of the low tax haven. What you don't pay in taxes, someone else has to pay in very cheap labor. Someone with fewer rights than you, hidden away in the statistics, hidden out of sight, with less power and no ability to leave when they want to. But you see, what's so deeply ironic about these low tax paradises and why they lack long-term stability is because they cannot exist. They fundamentally cannot exist without other nations that do pay high taxes. I'm talking about nations that do spend lots of money on education, who spend money on healthcare. These other nations pay to build the talent, and then places like Dubai leech that talent off of them. They don't really create their own talent. And without the nations that do, they can't exist. But you see, whilst all this is going on, people jumping ship to go to places to pay zero tax. Fine, that is all happening. But you see, that is only a part of the picture. Not all of these digital nomads or people leaving their country, they're not all trying to just dodge taxes. In fact, many of them are going to other places. Places that the Bitcoin bros don't like to speak about. And that is places with higher taxes. Countries like Finland, the Netherlands, and other Nordic nations, they too have seen a rise in skilled migrants into their country. But these are places that pay taxes. Lots of taxes. 50 to 60% of taxes. And yet people aren't being chained and forced to come into this country. Somehow they're walking in voluntarily. Who'd have thunk it? And so you might be wondering, why is that? Well, you see, in these glorious Nordic model Scandinavian countries, the trains run on time. Childcare doesn't bankrupt you. Ambulances don't ask you for your insurance card before your blood type. Because in these nations, whilst life is taxed, it is actually livable, safer, and happier. And the thing about this is it actually tells us like a sort of uncomfortable truth. The real crisis as to why people might be leaving Britain might not be because the weather sucks, and might not be because people are running from our taxes. They might be running from countries that take your taxes and don't really give you much in return.
Britain's railways are a mess and people are fed up.
Britain's energy regulator Ofgem has announced an 80% jump in its price cap for domestic energy.
Since 2020, England's water firms pumped sewage into our rivers and seas for more than 7 million hours.
The UK has high taxes, but due to an era of austerity, privatisation and general bullshittery, we find ourselves paying Scandinavian levels of tax, but we do not get Scandinavian level results. And that's because, like, why we pay the amount of taxes that we do is like, it can be 45% at the high end, maybe even like 50 odd, is because a good chunk of our money is not being spent on making a bright, beautiful future. It's basically being spent patching up the past fuck-ups. We spend tens of billion every year just on the interest on government debt, much of which we have racked up due to austerity tanking our economic growth. We are now paying more on disability benefits because years of our NHS funding not keeping up with the planned population growth that we've gone through. This underfunded NHS means that people get sicker, stay sicker, and some of those people get so sick that they end up dropping out of the workforce. We find ourselves paying more for out-of-work unemployment benefits because our wages have stagnated. Jobs have become so precarious and insecure now, and lots of businesses just haven't really invested in growth for over a decade. And when COVID hit us at the height of all of this, resulting in us needing to take out even more emergency debt, our very high tax rates end up just going for paying the price of austerity. And honestly, man, when I went out to Bali, I do get it. I do get why people want to leave the UK. Britain, to me, increasingly lately, just feels like a hostile place to live. It always feels like it's out to fucking get me. Every time a bill comes through my door, I have a mini panic attack because it's always £1,000 every time for some reason.
£1,000? I should say about £1,000.
Parking tickets are insane. Every time I want to go get a nice coffee in town, I pay just as much for the parking for 20 minutes. So then sometimes when I, don't pay it, I get a parking fine of nearly 100 quid. Our towns are visibly decaying, and just the rising cost of everything just makes life depressing. And on top of that, when you see the fact that the wealthiest people are getting so rich, all the while it just feels like every big business delivers the lowest customer service possible. They're constantly cutting money. If something goes wrong with some product that you paid for, you spend half a day on their customer service talking to robots. And all of that, I haven't even began talking about the weather. And like, man, I do love Britain and I would love to stay here. But I too find myself scrolling on Rightmove when I come back from a holiday. Just wanting to go somewhere that feels a bit less hostile. Somewhere that doesn't stress me out so much. And ironically, I'm not even drawn to low tax countries like Bali or Dubai. To me, when I went to Bali, I felt weird. I felt uncomfortable with the dynamic of I was the rich, wealthy foreigner and these very poor locals who do incredible jobs, who work incredibly hard, get paid pennies. It just made me feel wrong. I didn't like that. And I can't imagine what that feeling is like if you're in Dubai. I genuinely would happily pay the taxes that I pay right now if I got something in return like Scandinavian nations do. Or even places like Spain and Portugal that seem to be moving in the right direction. They seem to be investing in their people more. Here in Britain, we're doom looping. And no one in charge seems to know what the fuck to do about it. And that brings us to the big question. What the fuck do we do about it? In my opinion, lads, you lot know me. I'm not sold on the whole low tax thing. I mean, lower taxes for people who can't afford to pay taxes. And I don't really buy into the whole deregulation thing that much. Maybe a little bit. But to me, what it comes down to is foundations. Incredible public education, great public healthcare, great public infrastructure, and research and development. If we think of it like a fucking house, that is the foundations of the house. Oh, everything else, you know, business investments, attracting capital, innovations, all that lovely stuff. That's the furniture. The furniture can only sit there because the floor holds it up. And like, what kind of is mad is politically, we used to understand this. This is what we went through in the beginning, you know, in the 60s, the Brits going to America. When that was happening at that time, the politicians didn't get around a table and say, oh, lads, we need to slash the state and cut taxes. Instead, they looked around and they said, well, if we want to keep scientists, then maybe we should invest into science. Maybe we should fund research. The answer back then to brain drain was more state-led initiatives, more support, more infrastructure, and more long-term thinking. Now, these days, as this problem has started to happen, our fucking logic has just flipped entirely.
And I will be taking action.
Truss entered office promising reforms including tax cuts to shake up and grow the economy, but instead her plan shook it to the core, sending the pound plummeting against the dollar, raising inflation, and bringing fears of a recession.
Since we massively cut taxes in the Thatcher era, a new growing voice is arguing for the same thing but to expand it, to cut corporation tax even more, to shrink public sector spending, investment, and this sort of talk about making the UK more business friendly.
When I hear that there's these 7 tech companies in the US, my brain goes, can't we have one here?
Yeah.
That if we don't create entrepreneurship friendly environments here, we are gonna become India.
And like, while a phrase like that sounds nice, the small print isn't that nice. It means cutting public investment into the British people. In order to have the low tax model of Dubai, you have to have a 2-tier society. A small, wealthy, elite upper class, and a massive population of low-paid workers who exist to service the rich. And that isn't just rhetoric, that isn't just theory, that is exactly what happens when this model is adopted. Ireland right now is the low tax model dream. If you look at their GDP per capita, they have absolutely smashed it over the last 20 or so years. Their corporate tax rate is 12.5%, and they have become the European headquarters for Apple, Meta, and Google. The biggest companies on earth are there in Ireland. This is the wet dream for the low tax advocates. But for the Irish people, well, in 2024, the median house price in Dublin hit 350,000 euros. In 2023, private investment firms bought up 20% of homes in Ireland. Over 12,000 units worth 4.2 billion. This skyrocketing in house prices led 70,000 people to leave Ireland in 2024. This is the highest exodus since 2015, and half of them were Irish citizens. An entire generation of young people in Ireland, you know, the smart, the go-getters, the entrepreneurs of the future, they are being priced out of the cities that they grew up in. And they're leaving not because they want to, not because they're trying to avoid avoid taxes, but because they have to. When you adopt this model, and we see it more and more times when different places around Europe are doing it, what you get are nice, lovely, shiny headquarters. You have the right-wing media just slapping you on the back. You get all the good headlines, but also you'll have a population quietly heading for the door. The low-tax paradise turns an entire country, a community, a historic land. It whittles them down into extraction zones for the ultra-wealthy, who suck out everything they can and give back very little. And so, you know, that's all very depressing, and that sucks, right? But what if there was an alternative? The alternative answer is, brace yourself, taxing the very rich people. And, you know, but hear me out, bring in wealth inequality, you know, to a sustainable level. We're not saying everyone fucking needs a Rolls Royce. Just, you know, perhaps this gap that you can see is insane, perhaps we have it less insane. Just a thought.
I'm never ever against entrepreneurship. I'm not against people getting rich. If you allow the rich to get richer and richer and richer, they squeeze the middle class and they squeeze the poor class out of things like housing, of things like space in cities, of things like energy, and of things like owning, sharing government and owning, sharing the media.
Of course, this argument of taxing the rich doesn't sit very well with rich people. Actually, that's not true. Some rich people, there's actually quite a lot that do want to be taxed more. But there are some that pump money into think tanks like the Heritage Foundation, bankrolled by billionaires like the Koch family, who just coincidentally very often like to publish reports telling us that taxing the rich will destroy the whole world. Very recently, when the UK announced that they were considering closing the non-dom tax loophole, these think tanks rushed to work and, would you believe it, told us that the UK is the second biggest loser of millionaires right now. And this report seems to have done its job. It seems like Labour probably aren't going to close that tax loophole. They'll just cut benefits for disabled people instead. And surprisingly, the Heritage Foundation doesn't have a lot to say about that. But the thing is, even about these reports, right, when you dig a little bit deeper, and even if we were to forget the fact that these reports concluded their data by scraping LinkedIn profiles and concluding where millionaires were set up based on the location status on their LinkedIn posts, even if their report was flawed, the irony is that if you actually read where they say that millionaires are going to, you'll see places like Paris, Canada, Australia, all of which countries that pay higher taxes than the UK. Another report came from the Adam Smith Institute. This was like some millionaire tracker. They too were saying that we're losing loads of millionaires. Conveniently, at the same time that Labour are talking about taxing millionaires. And yet, again, if we look at the countries in the report, places like Sweden, Japan, Germany, France and Belgium, all are high tax-paying nations and seem to be attracting more millionaires. Look, this fear-mongering from very rich people to tell you that if you were to tax them more, the whole world will blow up. This isn't a new thing. Andrew Carnegie, back in the 19th century, famously once said, "It would be better for mankind if the millions of rich were thrown into the sea than so spent to encourage the slothful, the drunken, the unworthy." He said that in response to people wanting him to pay more tax. The thing that no one seems to get, no one seems to mention when we talk about capital flight, when they fearmonger around it, is that in an economy, it is demand that drives an economy. Demand meaning people having money to spend. When there is demand, people build things. They hire people. People eat out in restaurants. They get a nice conservatory so they can sit out and spy on the neighbours in the house that they own. Big capital alone doesn't create that. People do. If some capital does leave, the world won't come crashing down. And to make that less abstract, there is a prime example we can talk about. Firstly, fuck Putin and everything. But when Russia invaded Ukraine, many nations pulled their businesses out of Russia. And one of those businesses was McDonald's. Good old Mackey's actually had some balls. Kind of impressed. But Mackey's leaving creates a really good case study of what happens when businesses leave. Because guess what happened? The buildings stayed. The staff stayed. The fryers stayed. The customers stayed. It reopened with the same menu, but just a new logo. That is because demand is what creates creates value. Like, why do we want to be held hostage by millionaires? Just think about it, like even logically from a millionaire's perspective. If you increase taxes on very rich people and they choose to leave the country and now they make zero profit, as opposed to staying and making, I don't know, 40 to 50% of profit, you would be pretty stupid to leave the country, right? You're overall losing money. A serious business person, the type of business people that we want in this country, should be the type of business people that see the value in paying taxes because it creates their fucking customer base. That is why Scandinavian nations, whilst having some of the highest taxes in the world, have some of the wealthiest, happiest, and the most resilient economies. That is because they understand a simple fundamental truth, which is that a country shouldn't be subservient to capital. The goal should be to build a strong society, one that is so strong that capital would be stupid not to invest in it.
Why do you think they're leaving?
I think the reason they're leaving is because the UK economy is really, really weak. Because the UK consumer is really, really weak. Because we've absolutely crushed the spending power of your average British family. So why are you going to start a business here?
So why is everyone going to Dubai? Dubai, they're going there because there's no tax. So what's going to happen is if we drive the millionaires out of this country, every ordinary normal person who pays 10 grand a year in tax will now have to pay 20 grand a year in tax.
Push the politicians to tax working people less and tax extremely wealthy wealth holders more.
Now look, man, I want to be fair to people like Dan Priestley, you know, these advocates for low taxes. I don't think Dan wakes up in the morning and twiddles his moustache and thinks, no, personally, I'm actually really in favour of a two-tier society where rich people fly golden jets and the poor peasants just mop shit.
Yeah, to save money.
I do think they believe in the idea of a strong middle class, but they believe you get that via trickle-down economics. But I mean, I think we've kind of gone through it. I don't think it works. But the problem is with these people is that it doesn't matter what their intent is if their fundamental theory doesn't work. I don't think we got to where we are right now because someone specifically wanted to underfund schools. I don't think that many people wanted to try and collapse the NHS. And I don't think that anyone really stood up and said, let's funnel 70% of new wealth up to the 1%. But that's what happens because we've made a rule set in this economy, which basically says whoever extracts the most wealth from a place wins. So the real question shouldn't be about who do we blame, but it should be who do we reward? Until we build an economy whose incentive structures reward contribution over extraction, stability over speculation, and public good over private gain, then we'll keep getting the same results. It'll just be a race to the bottom. Because think about it, if we want to go down that low tax model, the competition will be who can afford to cut taxes the most. The nation that is willing to slash taxes the most and gut their public spending the most will win. Dubai is currently winning because it has a small population, slave labor, basically a dictator who has control over an oil supply and who deliberately leeches talent from nations that build it. And you have to ask yourself a question, is that the game we want to play? Is that what we want to compete against? Do you want to live in that world? If you plan to compete with them in that game, you will lose unless you want to be as equally brutal as they are. We don't need to do that. We need to build a brighter, more optimistic alternative. As a country, we need to rebuild the foundations that we have been tearing down for 40 odd years. If you build a country that prioritizes capital over people, don't be surprised when the people eventually try to leave. If you enjoyed that video, be sure to support me on Patreon. It really helps me write these videos and pay my staff well. Also, just another thank you to today's sponsor, Incogni. Make sure you check them out in the links below. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.